Good afternoon. I'm Catherine Hambleton with NASA's Office of Communications. The approximately two-day test, known as the wet dress rehearsal, began Friday, April 1st, and was stopped prior to tanking on Sunday, April 3rd. On a second run at tanking on Monday, April 4th, the team encountered an issue with a panel on the mobile launcher that controls the core stage vent valve and stopped the test near the end of the day. The test is designed to demonstrate the ability to conduct a full launch countdown at Kennedy Space Center's Launch Pad Launch Complex 39B, including loading and draining cryogenic or super cold propellants into the Artemis 1 rocket. Here to talk with us about the test and the path forward are Tom Whitmire, Deputy Associate Administrator for Common Exploration Systems Development at NASA headquarters in Washington, Charlie Blackwell-Thompson, Artemis Launch Director, Exploration Ground Systems Program at NASA's Kennedy Space Center, and Mike Serafin, Artemis 1 Mission Manager at NASA headquarters. After brief opening remarks from our speakers, we'll take your questions. You can enter *1 on your phone to be entered into the question queue at any time. Your phones are on mute now, and the operator will open your mic when we're ready and close your mic after you ask your question. We do ask that you please stick to one question and identify to whom your question is directed. Shortly after we conclude, you can listen to a replay of this teleconference online. So first, we'll go to Tom Whitmire.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. Yeah, let me just talk for a few minutes, and then I'll get it over to Charlie. I know you have a lot of questions that she'll be able to help you out with. It was I had a chance to be there with Charlie and Mike yesterday. It was really cool to see the Mega Moon rocket sitting at the pad, and we have our control rooms and our displays and our videos of what's going on, and it was very interesting. I think that Charlie and their team just did an outstanding job. I can't compliment them enough on their professionalism and their coordination and their confidence as they go through this. Charlie will talk to you about the things we did accomplish, and there were quite a few, and so that was a really good opportunity to get some things behind us. There's a couple of things we learned that they're going to go ahead and clean up, and that's the standard type of thing. We went through a lot of that at Green Run at Stennis. And then, the only other thing I was going to add is that at one point when we got into the initial cryo load, it was really interesting to see how the team came together and handled this. We talked about it being a dance, and it's a highly choreographed dance, and you have pressure, volume, temperature, and flow rates and pumps that you're trying to all work together to create the environment that you can feel the rocket and get into account. And sometimes you run into something that's a little different than what you were expecting. It's kind of like putting a puzzle together, and you start to put the pieces in, and it's not looking the way that you thought it should look. Well, they hold when they have a situation like that. They talk about it, and they decide what the right course of action is. It's to kind of recreate where they want to be, get to the image that they're looking for. They actually analyze that, come up with a plan. They have models that they verify the plan in, and they remove a couple of the pieces of the puzzle, some of the sequencing, and back out of the operations just a little bit, and then they recreate the puzzle. And it was just incredible to see this happen. These folks are really outstanding. I couldn't be prouder for them. And so it was really a good test, and we'll go back into it here in a little while, and we'll continue as we go through wet dress rehearsal. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Charlie.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here today and to talk about our progress during wet dress rehearsal. Yesterday was a significant day for us, and as Tom said, our team accomplished quite a bit. This is a test, and the purpose of the test is to fully understand our systems in a day of launch configuration. And this was the first test in this configuration at the pad with cryogenics. So it was a pretty big day for us. The wet dress rehearsal consists of several test objectives. We have 2 primary test objectives and 5 secondary. And one of our 2 primary test objectives was completed with the work yesterday, and then 3 of the 5 secondaries are now complete. We do have one that is partially complete, and then one related to the cryogenics piece that remains open, and certainly the one primary objective that remains open is related to the cryogenics, and so I'll talk a little bit about that as we go forward. So as most of you know, we were here, I think, I forget which day we were here. I think we were a few days ago. Sunday. And we talked about the work that had been done since Call to Stations, and just a quick kind of recap on that. Our Call to Stations was on Friday. That set us up for a Sunday loading. We didn't actually get an opportunity to get into our loading operations that particular day. We had a supply fan issue, and we talked about that prior. So we stood down for 24 hours to understand that capability, or to recover that capability. The team did a really good job over the course of that 24 hours, working that, troubleshooting that and understanding it, and getting us in a configuration to proceed. So on Monday morning, just yesterday, we came in and had our pre-tanking briefing, and we were got the go for tanking out of that meeting, and the team prepared to get that into work. Just before our meeting or our briefing completed, we did find out that there had been an issue with the GN2 supply to the center, and so that created a little bit of an issue for us. The GN2 supply went down while they were troubleshooting that, and then it came back up. And so around 10 a.m., we got back into configuration. The team was ready to begin cryogenic loading operations, and we started LOX chill down right around 10:40 local time. We began pumping LOX to the launcher just before 11 o'clock, and then somewhere around about 11:30 local time, we have some what we would call, built-in protections in our software system. It's called reactive control logic, and so we did get a stop in our software, a reactive control logic hit that was an anti-geyser violation, and so the team began looking into that and troubleshooting that, and determined that it was due to the configuration of the core stage and the upper stage ML piping. And after evaluating that, it was determined that just in the configuration of the lines, you end up getting a little bit of LOX that goes up into that upper stage vertical column, and then as you change the pump speed on your LOX pump, some of that warm LOX will come back into the main fill stream of the core stage, and so some of the inlet temperatures there, we saw an excursion on. The team stopped, took a look at the situation, evaluated it, and determined that we needed to load in a little bit different manner. And essentially what it consisted of is when we would change, as we go through our loading profile, we go from chill down, slow fill, fast fill, topping, and as you go through those different phases of loading for LOX, you end up changing your pump speed and the capacity in which you're pushing fluid into the vehicle. So they went off and looked at how they could alter that and get into the loading operations, and they were able to develop that procedure and put that into work, and we were able to load LOX into the core stage for the very first time, and we got about halfway in our loading operations. We did start our preparations for LH2 loading, and we did encounter an issue, as Catherine described, with the LH2 pneumatic pressure panel at the pad. We utilize pneumatic pressure or helium to activate the core stage vent valve that is required to get the LH2 to flow into the core stage hydrogen tank. So we were at a point where we did attempt both our primary and our secondary valves, but that did not resolve the issue, and we decided that based on the length of day and where we were in the LOX loading profile, that we would need to send a team into the pad to take a look at that panel and that configuration. So we stopped our cryogenic loading operations yesterday. In addition to the LO2 loading that we did accomplish, we also were able to verify our Orion launch countdown configuration and checkout, our Orion day of launch communications. We did our JSC commanding with the flight control team. We were able to do the upper stage flight control preps and the guidance checkout, booster power up and configuration, some of our core stage engine purges and MPS checkouts, and all of our range safety checkouts were complete. So there was quite a bit of our day of launch configuration that was completed. After the scrub, we went through our cutoff and safing, which is also an important thing, and getting into our drain operations, which is something that we also wanted to demonstrate how we would work through that. That was done successfully. And at this time, the vehicle, all of the elements of the flight hardware are powered down: Orion, ICPS, booster, and core stage. The ML configuration has all been saved. The ML's been depressurized, where our ECS system is back on air from GN2 back to air. And so we are currently in a good configuration out at the pad to begin looking at that next opportunity. And so let's see, I think that's the summary of where we are today. And Mike, I can hand it to you.
Okay, thank you, Charlie. You know, as the mission management team chair, you get a chance to sit back and watch the team work through these challenges and deal with, you know, real physics and technical constraints on a very complex system that's taken years to develop and produce and get to the launch pad. And Tom said it at the outset that this team has come together as one team. There's remarkable teamwork going on. The vehicle sitting at the pad is a physical representation of how that team has come together. You know, the mobile launcher and the launch pad is a great representation with the launch control center off in the distance of the exploration ground systems team and our launch operations team. The Space Launch System rocket that comes in the form of the boosters, the interim cryo propulsion stage, the upper stage, and the core stage, and the liquid engines on board, you know, represents the Space Launch System and the team out of the Marshall Space Flight Center. And then the Orion spacecraft sitting on the top represents our team out at Houston. And, you know, the team has really come together not only through training, but through this test program, and is demonstrated resilience, remarkable technical discipline and toughness as they work through these issues. And Charlie outlined a whole myriad of technical challenges and issues that we've had to overcome, in addition to environmental issues like the weather over the past weekend. I'll say that there's a lot of learning going on, and we're a learning organization, and we take pride in learning from these tests, and we're taking the time to apply those lessons learned and roll those into the next attempt. And we're gonna get past a partially successful test that we had earlier this week, and we anticipate that we'll have a fully successful test in short order here. So that's it for me.
Thank you. Excuse me. We will now begin with our question and answer portion. Again, please stick to one question and identify to whom your question is directed. If we have time, we'll allow reporters to ask a second question. Again, you can enter *1 on your phone to be entered into the queue at any time, and you can enter *2 if you'd like to be removed from the queue. First, we will go to Marcia Dunn with the Associated Press.
Yes, hi. SpaceX launch is now taking priority. So what is the earliest you would conduct the demo test? Would you start from scratch? How would that all work?
Hi, Marcia. You were kind of low and broken in the background, but this is Mike Serafin. I'll say that we're staying in close contact and collaborate daily with our commercial crew in International Space Station and commercial LEO partners that are launching off the other pads. And we're aware that their primary launch attempts are coming up here soon. We're looking at our constraints relative to rolling in the lessons learned that we just discussed, and it looks like we'll take just about as much time as they're going to need, as we're going to need for Axiom to fly. So we'll fall in behind them. Exactly what date that is, we've got to finish sharpening the pencil on our open work, but we don't anticipate that it'll be too much longer than after the Axiom launch.
Thank you. Our next question is from Philip Sloss of NASA Spaceflight.
Thanks. Was the issue with the core stage LOX chill down that you ran into yesterday, how was it similar, if at all, or how is it different from the situation that you ran into at Stennis when you first attempted to load liquid oxygen onto the core stage? Thanks.
Hey, Philip, this is Tom. Let me take a little bit of that, then I'm going to turn it over to Charlie. I went through the whole campaign at Stennis, and you're right. We ran into the LOX load is always, it's a little tricky, right? And it's more dense than hydrogen, and you have to worry about anti-geyser. So it has unique characteristics that make it, particularly the initial part of the load, fairly challenging. We had a different situation going on at Stennis. We had to worry about the coldness of the LOX. We were coming off barges and a run tank. And so they did a very similar thing. It's like the little puzzle thing I talked about where they looked at the different temperatures and flow parameters and sequencing, and they worked around that. It was somewhat similar, and I'll let Charlie talk about what we did this time. It was a slightly different cause for the challenge, but it fundamentally comes down to LOX is fairly dense. You have to pump it. It takes a while to pump it. You have to really worry about its thermal condition as you go through the process, particularly at the start of the flow process. So it was a different challenge at Stennis, but kind of many of the same considerations. And Charlie, I don't know what you'd like to add to that.
Yeah, I would say Tom is absolutely correct. They were similar in that it had to do with your inlet temps, right, at the core stage. But the difference, I think, is that, and I'm not as familiar with the Stennis configuration, but ours was very unique to the upper stage and the configuration that supports not just a core stage load, but an upper stage load as well. And so as you think about, if you think about the, core stage and the upper stage being higher and just having a column, if you will, a vertical column of cryogenics, and certainly it was a small amount, but as you're loading, as you throttle that pump speed back, you're going to have some amount of that LOX that's in that upper stage, headed toward that upper stage skid, is going to come back down into your main flow stream, and that affects your temperatures, and that was fundamentally what the issue was here. So it really was similar in that it had to do with the inlet temps, but it was different because it had to do with the upper stage and really the architecture of the loading that we have.
Thank you. Our next question is from Eric Berger of Ars Technica.
Hi, thanks for doing this. First of all, I just wanted to say it was kind of difficult to follow along the test on Sunday and Monday. Like basic information when prop loading began and the test window could close. It just feel like it was lacking. I know you guys are working on that, but it was certainly noticeable. Second of all, Charlie, you mentioned you made good progress on the test objectives. But from an outside, from a non-engineer, it seems like the dynamic part of the test, or really dynamic, is like when you sort of start filling both tanks and topping off and so forth. So I'm just wondering, how far do you feel like you've gotten? Like if you're running a marathon, are you mile 5, 10, 20? Just trying to get a sense of do you feel like you're really close, or do you still have a lot ahead of you? Thanks.
So that's a tough one to answer because wet dress is certainly about cryogenics, but it is also about day of launch configuration, and it is about all of your external interfaces. So from an external interface, with the range, the Johnson Space Center, external commanding to the vehicle, all of those things were accomplished. As I said, the Orion configuration was verified, ICPS. So there's a significant amount of test objectives that were completed. With respect to the cryogenics, we got through our loading, our LO2 loading to, again, about 50% on the core stage, but we still have the core stage hydrogen load to go. We look forward to getting into that, and then we also have both commodities on the upper stage. So it's really hard to put a number to what that is in terms of thinking about running that race, how far you got, but I would characterize it as a significant amount of our objectives have been completed. We certainly look forward to finishing out the cryo loading operations and, as you stated, that dynamic phase of loading and getting that objective behind us.
Eric, this is Mike Seraph, and I'm going to just jump in here. I think Charlie's being modest. And I say that because earlier this week, Charlie and I and a few others were discussing the preparations to even just get to the cryo loading phase and what Charlie terms getting out of the pad, which is basically reconfiguring the vehicle from where you're doing preps and servicing just to have access to the vehicle. And there's all sorts of guards and steel and platforms in place that are in place that you got to remove to get to the flight configuration. And I'll pause there, Charlie, and see if you have anything to add on that, because I know that was a significant timeline validation effort that occurred earlier this week. So I'll let you follow up on that one.
Yeah, Mike, so thanks for that reminder. You are correct. So one of the things that I always tell folks is there are two, anytime you're in launch countdown or wet dress, right, it's a hard set of work to go do. But there are two pieces of that work that are really challenging. One is when you get into terminal count, and the other is getting out of the pad. And it's really tough to get out of the pad. You have to get you have to get everything configured. That has to be done locally. You have to get all of your work done. All of the, what I call big steel moved. You got to get the engine service platform down the hill. You got to get the side flame deflectors in position. You got to get the extensible columns jacked. There is just a lot of work to go do, and all of that is your critical path to tanking and your critical path to air to GN2 transfer. And so we were able to go through and demonstrate all of that work and get through that, and that is a big deal for us. One of the test objectives for wet dress was to go through your timelines in some of these critical areas and demonstrate what those are and see how the as runs compared to your planned timeline, so that you have all of that data and you can put those together for launch. So, yeah, Mike, thanks for that reminder.
Thank you. Our next question is from Stephen Clark with Spaceflight Now.
Thank you. Stephen Clark from Spaceflight Now. Just wanted to follow up a little bit on the vent valve issue yesterday. That actuation panel, I understand, is on the mobile launcher itself. Has the team gotten out there to take a look at that valve and determine the cause of why the primary and the redundant valves were not responding?
Yes, we got teams out to the pad today, and after inspection, we found that the manual hand valve was in the closed position and should have been open.
Thank you. Our next question is from Marcia Smith of Space Policy Online.
Thanks so much. I'd like to pick up on a question that Marcia Dunn asked, because I didn't catch the answer. And she had asked whether or not you had to start from scratch when you do this again, or do you pick up where you left off? How much more of it do you have to do?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We don't have to start from scratch. We're at a really good hold point. We can get some other work done out at the pad, while we're getting configured, while we're topping off commodities, but we don't go all the way back to the beginning, which puts us at an advantage for when we start back up. We're laying out those timelines right now, and so we'll have those a little bit later, but it won't be all the way back to the beginning. If you recall, when we started, we had a couple of days of preps, and then we had the wet dress itself was about 2 days long, so that was about 4 days. And so this time we're looking at something significantly shorter. I would say something in about the 36-hour time frame.
Thank you. Our next question is from Chris Gabehart of NASA Spaceflight.
Yes, thanks, Charlie. From a team perspective, I'm curious. I know you have a little bit more flexibility on these test days than you would on launch day, but about how late in the day could you actually go for those 2 final terminal count runs based on coming in and starting your tanking meetings at around 7 from a crew rest and a crew health standpoint? Thank you.
So we like to keep the length of day, 12 hours or less, ideally. And so we had planned to start our tanking at 7 and then to finish up about 2:30 in the afternoon, understanding that we still had a couple of hours of drain left at the end.
Thank you. Our next question is from Christopher Kokinos of Astronomy Magazine.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for doing this, and good luck as you continue. I just had actually a quick clarification question, and then a larger question. The clarification is, you talked about GN2. Is that the gaseous nitrogen? And it's just unclear to me what that outage. I'm quoting from your blog, an outage with the vendor of gaseous nitrogen required for taking operations or preparations. Just wondering what that was more precisely. And just to be clear, you're not pulling back to the VAB, is that correct? For the next, you're just going to leave it out on the pad and then get to the next abbreviated wet dress rehearsal. Thank you.
Yes, we are remaining at the pad in preparation for our next wet dress rehearsal attempt. With regard to the issue that they had with the supply, I can certainly share. I don't have full insight since it's not something that I directly work with. But as I understand it, or what was reported to us, is that they had a vaporizer that froze up. There was a LN2 leak that affected the entire capability, and so they had to, because it froze, they had to bring the capability down momentarily, allow it to warm up, and then reinstate it. So we certainly had capability once they secured the area that they had the issue with, and then, as I said, let the equipment warm up, and then started to resupply GN2 to the pipeline.
And to be real, Christopher, this is Mike Serafin. To be real clear on this, this is a commercial supplier that's off the Kennedy Space Center facility that supplies gaseous nitrogen that's used to inert volumes of the vehicle, and we're not the only user of that supply.
Thank you. Our next question is from Kenneth Chang of New York Times.
Thank you. So this is following up on Chris Gephardt's question. If you hadn't had the valve problem with the liquid nitrogen, would you have done the full countdown? Does that seem like it would have ended at 10 or 11 at night?
We would have, let me see. So we would have started the tanking operations earlier had we not had the GN2 supply issue that delayed us, but we still would have run into an issue with the pneumatic valve out on the mobile launcher, and that would have ultimately still caused us to delay the hydrogen load.
Yeah, and Kenneth, was your question that, or was the question if we had the valve, the LH2 valve, the hydrogen valve properly configured? I think the answer was we would have gone into the hydrogen load and see how far we, and again, and Charlie would have a better way of saying it, that if we hadn't had the valve in the wrong configuration, we would have gone into the hydrogen load, and we couldn't go any farther with the LOX load until we started loading hydrogen at that point. So we would have proceeded, and then it would have been up to Charlie to decide how far we could get in our operations. Did I get that right, Charlie? Or?
No, you got it right, Tom.
Thank you. Our next question is from George Dvorsky of Gizmodo.
Hi, everybody. The sense I'm getting is that the issues that have been experienced over the last several days are nothing of a really major variety. And I do understand, of course, that there needs to be a more thorough investigation of the wet dress and, of course, the subsequent one that's to follow. But am I to understand that there's really nothing been too alarming, nothing too catastrophic, and that, we're not really talking about anything, potentially problematic in terms of the pace of where the program is at right now? Thanks very much.
Yep. Hi, George. This is Mike Serafin. Yes, that is correct. I mean, we haven't run into any fundamental design flaws or design issues. These are what I'll characterize as nuisance or just kind of technical issues where we're learning features and systems that we characterized in subscale testing, but when you put it all together, you learn where some of your uncertainties are, and we're working our way through that. We've done a remarkable amount of ground testing at the component level, whether it's structural and loads and dynamics testing or software and avionics testing. But when you put it all together, and then you add the natural environment factors, and then the cryogenic temperatures and all the other factors involved, sometimes you learn that the full system is slightly different than the subscale, and that's what we're working through right now. But you're correct that none of these are major issues that we need to overcome. We just need to work our way through it so that we can be efficient when it comes time to do this for launch day.
Yeah, George, just to be super duper clear, the Mega Moon rockets, it's fine. Then everything we just talked about is that partnership we have between the rocket and the facility that works together to get us in a launch condition. And so, we're learning stuff, we're figuring out pieces of the puzzle, and that's good. But from a flight hardware perspective, we haven't seen anything in these operations that would is really on the flight side. It's really kind of marrying up the rocket to our ground system and getting them to work together. And this dance we talked about, it's just complicated. We're going to work through it. I think the team's doing a really good job.
Thank you. Our next question is from Raman Skvita of Wired Magazine.
Hi, thank you. I would just wanted to ask, this is mainly a question for Charlie or maybe Mike. I just wanted to ask, how does it feel to be, so close to getting this huge rocket finally ready for launch? I mean, is it feeling exciting, or is it also maybe a little bit, nerve-wracking or frustrating to come across these, technical problems and also with the problem with the fans and then this valve? I'm assuming you're hoping this would be done already. Is this pretty standard, or is it maybe a little bit frustrating having these, delays to deal with?
So let's see, Mike, I'll take that one first, and then you can add to it. So, I would tell you that we are at a very exciting point in our program. I mean, I've been working on this since 2014, and so to have this amazing vehicle at the pad, I'll tell you, yesterday when I came in, I pulled into the Launch Control Center parking lot, and I actually walked down toward the road, and I stood there for a minute, and I just looked out at the pad. It was dark, I came in, it's early in the morning, and before sunrise, and I stood there for just a minute, and I looked out at the pad, and I thought, wow, this is an incredible vehicle, an incredible capability that is going to return us to the moon and one day take us on to Mars. And I'm standing here in the parking lot looking out at the pad at it and thinking about this test that's in front of us that demonstrates our day of launch capability and how close we are to that. So it is exciting. It's exciting for the team. Would we have loved to have finished the test yesterday? You bet. But I think that we do our best work. I think NASA does some of its best work when it is solving problems, because I think that's part of what calls us to this, right? It's that curiosity, it's that love of exploration, but it's also the fact that you have these things that you're going to meet head on and you're going to go solve. And so I couldn't be more proud of our team and the work that they've completed so far, and their creativity yesterday when they encountered an issue of figuring out, okay, this LOX loading didn't quite work the way that we expected it to in our software, but we're going to sit down and we're going to figure out a way to make it work, and they did. So I may have rambled on a little bit there for your question, but Mike, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, I kind of have a mix of feelings here. It feels familiar, but different, and I'm also appreciative. And the familiar part is, the physics are the same. Many of the risks are the same as other programs that I've worked, and just the dedication of the team. But it's different because we have a new vehicle, and while we have many of the same team members, everybody's in a different role. This is the first time this team is flying this particular vehicle and getting ready to execute this particular program, the Artemis program. So there are some differences, and then the appreciation aspect is really of our forefathers and just a recognition of how hard it is to get through this first time build and production and test program and get through the first flight, because speaking for myself, I took that for granted. Every program that I worked up until recently was an established program, and I worked the operational aspects of it. And we didn't have to learn some of these nuances and characteristics that we talked about here that we're learning here at Wet Dress, or any of the prior testing that's been done or prior training that's been done. So familiar but different with appreciation is kind of how I'd answer your question.
Yeah, and let me add to that. I did the shuttle program, and there's just a lot of attention. We would have things come up periodically in the shuttle program, and we had done it hundreds of times, and still things come up, and you just kind of deal with it and move forward. I think the team's doing a tremendous job. Historically, if you look at this type of stuff, they're doing really good. I can't be prouder of the ground team that we have and the OEMs that are doing this in our international partnership. I'm not seeing anything, the mega rocket's doing good, and these are not. I think there's just a lot of attention right now because it's such an incredible new capability, and people are really interested, which we're really glad that people are that interested. But based on my history, and I've been through a lot of this stuff, this is the kind of thing that you'll run into, and they're working their way through it. And I think they're really actually. My impression is they're just doing an incredible job. I wish. Yesterday when they worked through the little puzzle of getting the locks loaded, and that was just absolutely incredible. So I'm actually very positive about the team, and I think they're doing good stuff. It's just, these type of things do come up, and they're working their way through it. And I think we'll have another coming up here in a couple of days, and we'll see how we do. I think it's actually, I'm feeling pretty positive about the whole thing.
Thank you. Next up, we have Manuel Mazzanti from Debate.
Hi, how are you? Manuel Mazzanti, covering the space program in Spanish. Two quick questions. I would like to have your comments on how well the weather behaved during this test. It looks like nature received the memo that SLS was going to be tested and responded in kind, even with light storms. So I wonder that it is super helpful to check different systems. So I would like your opinion on that. And my second question is, does this minor delay affect in some way the June launch window? Thank you.
Manuel, this is Mike Seraphin. So as far as the weather is concerned, I would say we saw the full extreme of what you can have for weather. We saw what our own meteorologists classified as strong to severe on Saturday, which gave our lightning protection system an opportunity to demonstrate its capability and protect the 32-story tall rocket sitting out there on the launch pad, and it did a fantastic job. And then Sunday and Monday during our wet dress rehearsal attempts, we saw remarkably good weather. The winds were very low. Monday in particular, again, our meteorologist classified it as superb, and it was in the 70s. The winds were low. It was a beautiful sunny day. I don't think we could have asked for better test conditions. We just ran into challenges with some of the systems getting through it. And the second part of your question, I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, the June
launch window. We're not ready to give up on it yet, and we'll reassess after wet dress as far as where we stand relative to any work that we pick up. I don't know, Tom, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, let's get through wet dress. We'll get another shot here in a couple of days. It's a great question, and I think we'll be in a much better position to answer it. When we get through the wet dress. Like I said, I'm very positive. The team's incredible, actually. And we just had a couple of things come up. They came up during the shuttle program, just so you know. It's just so we're getting a lot of attention to this activity. And so we'll get through the wet dress, and I think we'll be in a much better position to talk about where we think we are for the launch. But once again, I can't emphasize enough, the vehicle's doing pretty good. We were just working our way through a couple things, we saw this at the Green Run as well, by the way, and we saw it during the shuttle program. And I'm really proud of the team. I think Charlie and Mike and the team are just doing a tremendous job.
Thank you. Our next question is from Michael Greshko of National Geographic.
Hi, thanks so much. I think this would be for Mike, but just to follow up on George's earlier question, is there anything that you've seen in the first attempt here that would complicate or lengthen any of the sort of the checkouts and refurbishment that you all have planned once you roll it back to the VAB after the wet dress rehearsal? Thanks.
Yeah, Michael, I would just say no. Most of the stuff we're picking up is small or procedural in nature. Some of it is we need to adjust some of the limits slightly, or some of the sequencing or timing slightly. As far as the hardware, Tom said it well. The rocket is fine, the spacecraft is fine. We just got to get through the test and the test objectives, and when we get through the test, we'll see what if any additive work there is. But right now, we're not tracking anything significant.
Thank you. Our next question is from Bill Harwood of CBS News.
Hey, thank you very much. Charlie, is there any way you can maybe give us a better idea of what geysering means when we're talking about cryogenic oxygen? That's just one of those words that will catch a reader's attention. In other words, what is the concern? What actually can happen, and what's the concern? Thanks.
Sure. Well, let's see. Geysering can occur when you have heat that enters your liquid oxygen feed system, and what can happen with that is you actually can form like a large oxygen gas bubble that can rapidly kind of expel. And when it does that, if you think about it, it displaces large volumes of heavy liquid, so LOX is heavy, and so it can kind of create this geyser effect, if you will. The way that we mitigate that is you actually have what we call helium inject, and it uses helium, and you inject that into your feed line system, and it helps to cool it down. That's the what we call anti-geyser, is that we use helium to provide that cooling, and so it allows the heat to escape. So I don't know if that helps at all, but that's kind of what the geyser protection is for, is that you don't want a big slug of warm LOX, going into your feed system. We monitor that very carefully because we want to make sure that, we're not creating that warm effect where you can create that big bubble, if you will, that can be expelled and then cause some problems.
Yeah, and let me add, first of all, Charlie, that was a great explanation. It literally is the tricky commodity is LOX, because you can look it up. This is where not giving you anything. Hydrogen actually flows pretty well. You worry about leaks with hydrogen, but it's much easier to plug the hydrogen. So, Eric asked about the marathon. I went to school in Boston, and I would certainly say if you're taking a marathon, getting through the initial LOX flow is taking the hill during the marathon. If you can get past that, doesn't mean you're completed your marathon, but it's a pretty good milestone. And that was one of the things they accomplished, is really figuring out how to get through the thing that Charlie just described, which is a tricky part of what we do.
Thank you. Our next question is Zach Aubert from the Launchpad News.
Yes, thank you. Zach Aubert with the Launchpad News. With the restrictions on the launch window for Artemis 1 looking forward, how long is SLS able to stay out on the pad for testing before it really has to be rolled back to the VAB to have enough time for final preparations? And what really are those before it may consider missing its June window, not because of the wet dress? And just a point of curiosity, last night we saw the pad stay dark on the cameras that we were getting as media. Just out of curiosity, why lights weren't turned on? Was it just because the pad was cleared and just being drained? Thank you.
Tom, do you want me to take the how long is the vehicle at the pad, or do you want that one?
Yeah, no, go ahead. Yeah, we've got some time. Go ahead, Mike, and I'll add it to the sub. Go ahead.
Zach, I would just say that we do have some time. We've got a load spectrum constraint that is a design constraint, and it assumes certain things. It assumes certain meteorological conditions, certain winds. The rocket is very tall. It's 32 stories tall. And as it sits out there on the pad, when the winds blow against it, it does create a load, a bending moment. So they factored in a natural environment constraint, and we are well below that constraint. We've got ample margin, not only for the wet dress, but rollout for flight. But that is probably our driving constraint. In order to get the vehicle ready, Charlie said a really interesting thing, and you probably guys,
you know, we got some primary objectives done. One was the range swing. So we don't have, normally what we're looking at is, you know, we've got range batteries and stuff like that. That's typically a limiting factor. We got through that test with the range. That's a really big deal. So it gives us a lot of flexibility to be out at the pad. And, you know, really just paced about updating the documentation. Charlie's doing a great job getting that sequence built back into the system. We'll get right back on out there. It's not going to be, we'll probably have a date for you here later on tonight or tomorrow, but we'll put a blog out. But it's just a couple more days we'll be back out there. So, and we got plenty of time at the pad. There's no big constraining factor for a while.
Okay, and Zach, to your question about the lighting, I think it was just the contrast with the ambient lighting at that particular time of day relative to the camera field of view. It just happened to line up so that it appeared dark, but I can promise you it is not dark at the pad, regardless of the time of day you go out there.
Thanks, and that's actually all the questions that we have time for today. You can listen to a replay of this teleconference online by visiting the Media Resources tab at nasa.gov/Artemis-1 later today. And thank you all for joining us today. To follow along with updates for the wet dress rehearsal, please go to the Artemis blog at blog.nasa.gov/Artemis. And you can also view the rocket on the pad with the live video stream on the KSC Newsroom YouTube channel. Thanks again, and that will conclude our call.